Hello, more anatomy for you. Continuing in the reproductive system, this lesson is going to focus on fetal development. Okay, so what's happening while a person is pregnant? What's happening in the uterus? What's happening while the fetus is developing inside that amniotic sac filled with amniotic fluid as a cushion for protection, okay, and being attached to the placenta via the umbilical cord. Remember, the placenta is what is allowing nutrients and waste to pass from the parent to the developing fetus. Okay, so we're kind of going to go through all of that from the beginning um, to birth. Okay, so before fertilization, a couple of key things have to happen. First of all, sperm transport. So sperm actually has to be transported from inside the epididymis, which is where sperm are growing and maturing after being produced in the testes. So sperm has to be transported from the epididymis mixed with fluid to enable it to survive in the vagina, in the uterus, and in the fallopian tube in that long journey. Okay, so sperm has to be transported from the epididymis to the fallopian tube. That has to happen. Second, egg transport has to happen. So there has to be ovulation. If ovulation doesn't occur, there can't be fertilization. So ovulation has to occur. Remember that egg busts through the outer layer of the ovary, and a lot of people with ovaries will feel that pain. And the fallopian tubes kind of grab that egg and pull it along the fallopian tube, and it kind of gets swooshed along like this along the fallopian tube. Then the egg and the sperm can meet in the fallopian tube for fertilization. So fertilization, in that moment, egg fertilizes is fertilized by a sperm. Sperm fertilizes an egg, the process of fertilization. Once the egg and sperm unite, it is a single cell now with a full set of DNA, and it is called the zygote. The zygote is that single cell formed when egg and sperm unite. So giant egg, remember, 30 times larger than the sperm. When the genetic material is fused, it now becomes the zygote. Right? And if I just show you again, this this GIF kind of went through that process. Okay. So the stages of fetal development in those first early weeks. Okay. So ovulation, it's an oocyte released from the ovary member, busting through the outer layer of the ovary. Traveling along, it is going to be fertilized by sperm, potentially in the fallopian tube. So that fertilized egg is called a zygote, that single cell. Cleavage is going to refer to division. So the first cleavage, now we have 2 cells. Then we're going to have another cleavage, and those 2 become 4, and those 4 become 8. And the 8 becomes 16, okay? And it continues to progress. It continues to double for a very long time, okay? But it just doesn't stay a ball of cells, okay? It becomes a hollow ball of cells, and then it will eventually fold in like this, which allows the neural tube to develop. But here, if you can see in this diagram, the blastocyst, that's that hollow ball of cells, okay? And then that is what is going to implant in the uterus roughly 8, 9, 10 or so days after fertilization, okay? So again, 2 cells, 4 cells, 8 cells, and you can see it is a ball of cells, okay? But now at this blastocyst, you see it becomes a hollow ball of cells with this inner cell mass, okay? The outer cells contributing to the forming of the placenta, and the inner cells becoming the developing embryo and fetus. So at what stage does an embryo implant into the uterine lining? Do you remember? It's the blastula. It's that hollow ball of cells. Okay, so now a lot of things are happening during the growth of the embryo and the fetus. So during the first trimester, remember, pregnancy is going to be divided into trimesters, so groups of 3 months, first 3, second 3, last 3, okay? But during the first trimester, so much is happening. All the organs begin to form. So those first 3 months are absolutely critical to the organism correctly developing, okay? And for the person who is pregnant, making good choices in terms of health and self-care are also important. So minimizing stress, refraining from alcohol, drug use, tobacco, smoking, all of those things will ensure that your embryo and then fetus is developing safely and correctly. Also being really careful of what medications you are taking. Some medications, although they might be prescription or over the counter, should not be taken by someone who's pregnant. So make sure you check with your doctor about what medications you should and should not be taking while you are pregnant. Okay, so here's a quick overview of what's happening trimester by trimester. So first trimester, and that's what a previous graphic focused on, but I really just want to kind of consolidate all the information. So the heartbeat can be detected after week 5, not from an external exam typically. The arms and legs begin to develop, those little tiny buds. The heart, the brain, the pancreas, the kidneys, the liver. Remember, all those internal organs are going to begin to form. That does not mean they're fully formed or functional at this point when they first form. Eyelids form, but then they do fuse because they're going to allow the iris to develop. Hair, fingernails, toenails, and the external sex organs are going to show the external anatomy, the external sex of the fetus. And that's around the end of this first trimester. Although even in an ultrasound or sonogram, at this point, it may not be easy to detect. All right, second trimester. So the fetus is going to be more active and developed. This is typically where a parent will feel the fetus move. Joints and bones have started to form. Remember that a baby will be born with more bones as they're not all fused. Skin is protected by fine, let's just say hair. The hair is called lanugo, and a waxy substance called vernix, because remember, it's inside the amniotic sac filled with amniotic fluid. And you know what happens to your skin if you are in a bath or a pool for too long. So that vernix helps to protect the skin of a developing embryo and fetus. It does cycle through sleep. Eyes blink, eyes open. Eyebrows and eyelashes start to form. So the hair was forming already. The fetus will breathe in amniotic fluid that strengthens lungs in preparation for birth. And again, the movements are felt. The third trimester is all about growth. So the organs fully form. The fetus is going to be responding to light and sound from outside the uterus. So loud noises will startle the fetus potentially. The fetus has periods of dreaming. Remember, that's rapid eye movement. That fine body hair, that lanugo, starts to thin. Okay. Scalp hair starts to grow in. The bones grow and harden, but remember, not fully because to allow for birth. The synapses, remember those spaces between neurons, form in huge numbers. So that means literally connections are being made at an amazing rate. The lungs complete their development. So a fetus born before the third trimester has a much harder time outside the uterus because their lungs are not fully developed. And then the fetus turns into, at some point during this trimester, into a head down position, which is normal pre-delivery. Okay, so When will the parent feel the fetus move? For a first pregnancy, it's typically around 16 to 25 weeks. So again, somewhere in that second trimester. For second pregnancies, it could be as early as 13 weeks. So what I can say is that typically for a first pregnancy, there is some time before the parent will begin to show, where people notice that the person is pregnant, and then it seems to happen real quickly with the second one, at least this speaking from personal experience and those of some friends of mine. So it's like you get pregnant the second time, your body's like, oh, been here, done that, and all of a sudden you are showing pregnancy earlier than you did with first pregnancy. So here's just a size comparison if you're interested in how big the developing fetus typically is around these weeks in pregnancy. So at 4 weeks, poppy seed, tiny. But by the end of the first trimester, about the size of a lime. Okay, so that is a lot of growth if you consider the number of times larger a lime is. Okay, so, and then from a lime to the size of a head of a cauliflower by the end of the second trimester. And then from the size of a head of cauliflower to the size of a watermelon at the end of the third trimester. Okay, so this is just a rough estimate. Again, it's all relative to the size of um, the fruit or vegetable chosen, but in general, it gives you a good idea of how much the size does change during pregnancy. All right, so folic acid. This vitamin, ridiculously important. Okay, so that's why I like to just spend a little bit of time talking about it. It's always present in prenatal vitamins, and prenatal vitamins are very important to take on a daily basis. You are, if pregnant, literally growing another human being. Okay, so making sure that you take your vitamin ensures that the developing fetus gets the nutrition that they need, where you may not always be interested in eating a serving of broccoli. A lot of people suffer from morning sickness and nausea and are unable to eat healthy foods. So the prenatal vitamin can help supplement when that's the case. You try to eat as healthy as you can, but also it's just important to get some calories when you just aren't feeling well. Okay, so folic acid is important for brain, skull, and spinal cord development. A condition can result called spina bifida, which is literally that the spinal cord has not fully closed and it can be open. And depending on the case, this is more or less severe. Okay, and folic acid is also present and important when red blood cells are forming. So a lot of foods you can see are dark green leafy vegetables, but also citrus, beans, wheat bread. A lot of foods are fortified with folic acid, and you can see that's B9. So you can just be conscious of the fact that taking the prenatal vitamin is important. Okay. All right, so what about twins? Okay, so identical twins are genetically the same. So that means one sperm fertilized one egg, and then at some point in the process, that split apart and formed two separate organisms. Okay, typically all twins will have separate amniotic sacs. Okay, but if that developing organism kind of separates too late, it is rare for identical twins to actually share the same amniotic sac. It can, again, it's rare. Okay, so identical twins, one egg fertilized by one sperm, and then as that is dividing and dividing and dividing and dividing, at some point it actually gets pulled apart, forms two separate organisms with separate amniotic sacs. But remember, it was from the same dividing ball of cells, so there's one single placenta. Each has their own umbilical cord, each has their own amniotic sac, typically, right? But same placenta. Now, fraternal twins are going to be two eggs. There's two eggs, and each egg is fertilized by a sperm. And this is hyperovulation, where typically more than one egg is released at a time during ovulation. Normally, it's a one egg at a time process. The same thing can happen with triplets. Triplets can happen naturally without, and twins without any family history. So how many sperm fertilize an egg when there are twins? Remember, that's one. One egg fertilized by one sperm. It's just fraternal. There were two eggs, so there had to be two sperm. Okay, and there you have it. That's a rough overview of fetal development, and hopefully you learned a thing or two.